There we go.
Okay, so there's a little error here. We've got the brain, and then we just added a fourth top risk factor yesterday, so it's not in the slide. So we have four that we're going to cover. There's many, many risk factors, but for the purpose of this class, we wanted to keep it succinct. And then we're going to cover the causes and solutions. So take it away, Chris.
Well, this was really your part, but if you want me to take it away.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. All right. So again, the brain has many, many different parts to it, and they're layered, right? But we wanted to, again, keep it fairly succinct for you today. So we've got three main parts to the brain. The cerebrum, which is the big orange part that you see there, is the largest part of the brain. And what's interesting to Chris and I is that there's a right and left hemisphere. And we talk about this a lot in yoga with right and left nostril breathing. We talk about this a lot with how it stimulates different parts of the brain, right and left sides. We're going to talk a lot more about that in empowered living. It's really responsible for the higher functionings like interpreting touch, vision, hearing, speech, reasoning, and emotions. Cerebellum is the blue area, and its function is to coordinate muscle movements, maintain posture, equilibrium, and balance. And so this one, when your balance starts to go, this is the part of the brain that's starting to be affected. And that's why it's so important to do like coordination movements, knitting, crocheting, balance exercises like in yoga, that kind of thing. We're going to talk about solutions as we go along. And then the brain stem, the part that actually connects the cerebrum to the cerebellum and then runs through the spinal cord and basically talks to the body. So it regulates things like breathing, heart rate, temperature, your wake sleep cycles, which is important to know, digestion, coughing, vomiting, swallowing, those kinds of things. So if you've ever had problems with things of this nature, these are the parts of the brain that are mostly affected. And again, it's a complicated and deep study, the brain is. What's really cool is the brain is the only organ in our body where size matters. As we age, the brain declines and it shrinks. And this is a normal process of aging, but we don't want to accelerate this process, right? So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. A little side note is that hemisphere that we talked about in the cerebrum, that's called the cerebral cortex. And it's the outermost part of the cerebrum. It's kind of like a covering, if you will. And it's the only part of the brain that makes us like different human beings from other, or
Wow.
human beings being unique, I should say, from animals or other
Plants, rocks, all the things.
anything, anything that has a brain. Um, and the other thing to know is that this was a big discussion with Chris and I early on is like, what is the brain and what is the mind? And we're going to talk about this a lot in empowered living, but people use those two words interchangeably, but they're different. They're really different. So the brain is the physical organ that the mind works through. I'll say that again. The brain is the physical organ, like your heart or your lungs or your muscles, that your brain works through.
Well, and we also talked about it being the brain is the computer hardware, the mind is the software. That's the program that you're feeding yourself, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and guess what? Darn it, as your weight goes up, your brain size goes down. So that's linked to many things. And again, we're going to really go deep into that in our empowered living course. But gaining weight, especially as we age, it really has a direct impact on the quality and health of our brain. We want to keep it, we want to feed it well and keep it working. And again, we're going to go through these big risk factors and why it's important to be aware, and then what changes you can make as you move through. Oh, I love this. Brain facts. It's the complex organ that controls every process that regulates the body. So again, it's our computer. Um, this is was really fascinating to me that it's the most metabolically active organ. It's such a small part of our total mass, and yet it really uses up to 25% of our body's total blood and oxygen intake. So again, back to what are you doing to take care of yourself and how are you feeding your brain? It's also the most sensitive of all the organs, which makes it really susceptible to oxidative stress. And we know what that is. That's those free radicals. I always think of the apple that you cut and then it turns brown. That's oxidation. And the same thing happens with the brain, and it really makes us age faster. And I don't know about you, but I kind of want to slow things down. I want a little more time in the through the windshield instead of just looking at the through the rearview mirror.
Yeah, the other things about the brain that a lot of people don't know is the brain actually needs fat, complex carbohydrates, and water to function. We're going to talk about some of the risk factors, and the number one risk factor that we're going to kind of hone in on specifically today. And if I'm sure you guys have heard this, but the foods that are really good for brain health are all the omega-3s, the fatty acids, the walnuts, the green tea, turmeric, which of course we talk about a lot in Ayurveda, broccoli, pumpkin seeds, those kinds of foods, really, really good for the brain. Um, so if you've wondered, like, well, what can I be eating? What can I be doing? Hydration, which we're going to talk about more, and these specific brain foods. I actually let you know how they say diet for your heart health and diet for this and that. Why don't we do a diet for your brain health? That's, makes a lot of sense to me.
And my guess is that they're all pretty much the same. There's other
Yeah.
things that we can add.
Mhm.
Excuse me. There's other things that we can add, but we all either know or don't know what a really good healthy diet looks like. And there's so much out there, so much conflicting
Right.
information, and it's hard to dissect, well, what works and what doesn't.
Well,
So
as Chris and I, we both talk about this a lot in our work. Ayurveda's famous line is "It depends," and so you have this overall um, diet. Let's just use that as an example. We have an overall diet that's good for everybody, and then depending on your individual needs, you're going to insert other things in there. And that's just how it should be for everybody. If you're following a diet because so and so's diet worked really well for them and it's not working for you, it's just because you have different hormones, different chemistries, different needs. So,
ask yourself, if you're looking at something specifically, if they totally exclude things that should be part of a healthy diet, like i.e. carbohydrates, it's probably not going to work, not over the long haul. And what you want to do, and I hate that word diet, I always think of how do you feed yourself for the rest of your life? And not like, oh, for 2 weeks I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to be here, and then I'm going to go back to what I was doing before and expect everything to magically just be better.
right.
It's ongoing lifetime practice.
Mhm. Okay, so our four top risk factors that we're going to talk about today is diabetes. I hope you've heard this terminology. This is a new upcoming terminology that everybody's talking about. Inflammation, dehydration, and lack of oxygen. And you might just in your kind of own sphere think, I wonder what the number one cause of brain dis-ease or dysfunction is. Like the one thing we need to be paying attention to more than anything else. All right, so diabetes is number one here.
But not
The
the number one risk factor.
right. And so the causes you can just imagine. So this is diabetes and obesity kind of linked together. So any unhealthy food choices, this is a big one, eating too much too often, sedentary lifestyle, and metabolic inflexibility. So what do I need? What do I mean by metabolic inflexibility? Chris says, so you get to talk about this part. So metabolic inflexibility means that our bodies need to be flexible with how it uses its energy as we eat. So let's just say, for an example, you eat an apple, your body will break it down into glucose really quickly, and then use it for energy. Okay, that's a simple analogy. But if we eat an apple and then we eat peanut butter and then we have a piece of bread and then we have a piece of meat, there's a lot of different fuel sources going on. And the body's like, wait a minute, I don't know what to use for what. So we create this situation from uh, not being not understanding what actually fuels us. And then also this eating too much too often is a huge problem, which kicks off this metabolic inflexibility. I talk about this a lot because I have this issue, mostly because I am, maybe many of you can relate. I grew up uh, in an era where there was no fat allowed in the diet, but you could eat as much sugar as you wanted. So everybody pretty much remembers the good old Snackwell cookies or the bagel with nothing on it. Right. And so there wasn't a good balance of fuel sources. So my body got really used to eating this glucose, quick glucose. And then what else did they tell us at that era? They told us to eat often because you would burn through that glucose and then you get tired. So then you got to eat again. Well, what that taught our bodies is how not to break down the protein and not to break down the fat, to store that over here because you might need it for later. And we're only going to use the glucose. So what a lot of people don't understand is that every single thing that you eat breaks down to glucose. It has to. It's just a matter of how quickly it does it. Fat does it the slowest, which is why it's important to have fat in your diet. Protein does it sort of the next slowest. And then any kind of carbohydrate you use, especially simple carbohydrates, goes really quick through the system. So to have metabolic flexibility means that your body has the ability to break down the food, use it properly, and store it properly. And if you have trouble, like if you eat and you feel tired, or in my case, if you don't eat, you get hangry, those are symptoms that your metabolic fuel system isn't working properly. Okay. And again, ask questions at the end because it's a complicated issue, but it's a big issue that's out there in the world right now, because guess what? All the baby boomers are now coming up with this. We all have it because we grew up in this other era. My husband, John, he was like, I didn't do that. Like I ate fat and I ate whatever I wanted. A lot of people did that, but I did not. And a lot of women did not because they were worried about their weight. Solutions to this issue is obvious: eating a healthy, clean diet. And when you're looking at healthy, clean diet, everybody pretty much agrees on this Mediterranean option. Lots and lots of vegetables, like half your plate of vegetables and a little bit of fruit, and then the other half is divided between complex carbohydrates and protein. That's pretty much what everybody says. And then again, we tweak it based on what we need. Practice meal spacing. This is what we talk about in Ayurveda. We don't necessarily talk about intermittent fasting, but that's what it is. It's distance between each meal and bigger distance between your last meal and your first meal of the next day. Again, snacking and eating too much too often is a huge problem for our culture.
Well, and just to interject real quick, it gives your body the chance to digest what you've just had and use it, and then have maybe a little space in between and maybe some hunger before you move on to the next meal.
Right. Yeah. Obviously getting regular daily exercise. We talked about this in one of our other empowered living programs, but if you haven't heard, if you just took a 10-minute walk after dinner, this in itself can help manage your metabolic system and your glucose levels really well. And it's a simple thing to do. Obviously manage your blood sugar, which means understanding what kicks your blood sugar way up and what doesn't, and learn to manage your stress levels. That's another piece that we're going to talk about in a minute. 70% of adults are overweight, 40% are obese, and over half have pre-diabetic and diabetic disease. So this is why everybody's talking about this, because it's a huge thing.
Well, and Sue and I were in Ayurvedic school, our teacher, Catherine, was talking about diabetes. She said this is going to be the big epidemic for everyone because
Mm.
most of us carry more weight than we should. And, this whole uh, accept me at any size, that's great. Don't demean people. But if you think that carrying all this extra weight doesn't have effect on your health, you're just kidding yourself.
Now, the science tells us that it's absolutely true. And it will catch up to you eventually. So it might not catch up to you when you're 30, but when you're 60, you're like, oh, yeah, things are starting to happen. Um, and so when you're thinking about this metabolic flexibility piece, really what we're looking at is how well does your body um, uh, create energy? And energy is done in the cells. So that's where we're really uh, going deep here, is when understanding this part of it. And it's not just our physical body, it's really focuses a lot on brain health when we're talking about these systems. Let me see, what else do I want to talk about? This is Chris's.
Inflammation. So again, look at it. It's the overly processed food. I would venture to say almost anything that you get out of a bag or a box because it's got too much sugar, too much salt. It probably has a bunch of other junk. The big ag doesn't care about your health. They care about your bottom line. And we are the experiment of the processed food phenomenon that, all this packaged food. It happened World War II, post World War II. I'm sure many of you remember your first TV dinner. So not only were they combining crappy food, but they were sticking you in front of a TV to eat it. So, and that for us was every once in a while. I'm sure it was more for my mom than the rest of us. But this whole idea of convenience and grabbing food that you don't know where it came from, you don't have any relationship to, you don't know what's in it, beware because it's really not good for you. Poor sleep, another driver of inflammation. So, there's many things that you can do to start to train yourself into a better nighttime routine. Again, that's a big subject. We'll go into this a little more in our course,
Chris, I
but
just want to interject. Kimberly had another good point about the TV dinners in aluminum trays.
oh yeah.
Hello, thank you very much. Now that we know what about aluminum.
Yes, exactly. So, getting your sleep under control, and they say 7 to 8 hours. And I know as we get older, it's a little harder to sleep longer, but if you can really at least get that 7 hours in, you're only going to be doing yourself and your brain a big favor. Chronic low grade stress. So we all have stressors, but it's that insidious low grade bear in the woods, bear in the woods, bear in the woods. Well, there's no bear, and we are not able to run away from the bear, especially if you're sitting working at your computer. And so it just kind of simmers and it's always on the back burner and it has a huge effect on your I was going to say insulation, inflammation markers. So you want to be aware of how things that you can do to handle stress and handle it's not the handling the stress as much as your response to stress. And I just heard something that I thought was kind of interesting. They said men and women process stress differently. So women are more susceptible and it has a bigger effect on our systems. And instead of the flight, fight, or freeze response that many of us get, women tend to go to tend and befriend, which is, kind of a good thing because it gives you that hit of oxytocin, and we all want that. And we all know how much we value friendships. But the other side of that coin is we're the caregivers. So we want to care for our friends, our kids, our spouses, our everybody. And that over time, especially if you're not caring for yourself and you're really directing that care towards others at your own expense, again, big driver of inflammation. And then the exposure to toxins. So it's not just the toxins in our food, but it's also the toxins in the products that we use around our house and the products that we put on our skin, washing our hair, all that stuff. And Sue, do you have any little tips in the toxin
Well, the other thing about
pain?
toxicity is, we absorb our environment, whatever we put ourselves in. So we have the environmental toxins, right, that are outside. We have the environmental toxins that are in our house. Um, and then we have all the environmental toxins that are in food, in um, products that we use. And women, again, because of this, we're more susceptible to the brain, uh, I'll call it dis-ease, unhealth of the brain, because we put so much chemicals on our system. I mean, on our body. So on our skin, think about, what do you make up? Hair, lotions, shampoo and conditioners, all the things that we use. I actually listened to a podcast not too long ago, and the guy was talking about, he sort of joked, he said, I haven't put anything other than water on my body for like 15 years, because he was listening to all this stuff about toxicity, and he was just like, I'm not going to use anything. And he goes, you know what? Nobody knows. I don't know. My hair looks great. And it's like, it was really kind of a funny story. But he was like, yeah, I'm not going to use it. I'm just not, because I don't trust it. The other thing I wanted to mention is, how do you know you have inflammation? We talk about this all the time. If you have joint pain, if you have muscle pain, if you have any gut issues, if you have obesity, you have inflammation. It's there, whether you want to, admit it or not. And arthritis, the one that I always go to is arthritis. Oh, it's normal as we get aged. No, it is not normal. There's nothing normal about that. That's inflammation in your joints that are coming from something. Now, it could be something that you have control over, or it could be something from like a injury, but regardless, it's there. And it will cause stress to the system, right?
So, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say that the other kind of statistic that's important to remember is from the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, 90% of doctors' visits are stress related. That's a lot. That's a lot. So solutions, Chris?
So, I'm feeling a theme here. Eat a clean seasonal diet. I was trying to think of how many different ways I could say the same thing. Again, good sleep habits, limit, wow, that's not spelled right, exposure to toxins, and then again, learn to manage your stress response. We don't always have control. Sometimes we do have control of the stress in our lives, but sometimes we don't. So it's not the stress, but how do we respond versus react? And as Sue said, we all of us probably have inflammation at least some of the time. And the greatest weapon, I love this, the greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. So, just a thing, here something happens, you have your response, and then how are you going to, somebody posted on Facebook, and I thought it was really great. The power is in the pause. So, you step back, you pause, and you make your decision. So, and we're going to talk a little bit more at the end about managing stress. And before we leave this page, Sue, do you have any essential oils that you would especially recommend for brain health?
Well, for brain health specifically, we could talk about frankincense. That's like the king of all oils, and it's been known to help us at a cellular level, which is so important on so many reasons. But that's the one that comes to mind right away. The other thing, if you use things like essential oils, right now I have in my diffuser peppermint and wild orange, which actually helps me with my energy, my focus. I'm a little congested because of the allergies here right now, so it helps with my breathing. And we'll talk about this, but anything that goes in through the nose goes up into the frontal lobe of the brain through the olfactory system. So it's a direct hit. So if you go to a friend's house and they've got those plugins everywhere, you know what I do? I walk around and unplug them because they're bad for you. They're really, really, really bad for you. And then you're in this closed in space, like most people put them in the bathroom. So you're in this tiny little room and you've got this plug-in in the bathroom and you're breathing this awful stuff. I'm like, no, no, no. And a lot of people don't know or understand that how that works. But if you think about a cocaine addict, what do? They snort the cocaine, they get immediate high because it goes right there. And this is the part of the brain where we have our focus. Our concentration is right here. So you don't want to mess with that. That's where we can lose our mind. Hang on, somebody's
Yes.
chatting with me. Are
Depends on
candles? Yeah, Ellen's asking me, are
yes.
candles bad? Also, yes, they are.
Mm-hmm.
For two different reasons. If you get a soy-based or a natural based candle that doesn't have any scent in it, that's one thing. But then you have to look at what it's burning. So if your candle burns and it's got that black sooty stuff and it gets on your walls or on your ceiling, yeah, no, don't use it.
Yeah, and if you
Um,
have candles, you don't want to get rid of them, burn them outside.
and Lynn's asking, is frankincense more effective for the brain through the nostrils or under the tongue? Both and. Okay. Both and both, however you
Mhm.
want to say it. Yeah, good questions. Thank you. Um,
Oh, this is one of my faves. Dehydration. You have all been dehydrated at some point in your life, and maybe you're chronically dehydrated. I'm just a quick story that I want to share about dehydration. I have a good friend who does not really feel, I'm never thirsty. How much water do you drink? Well, maybe a cup, maybe two a day. I'm like, it's not enough. It's not enough. So I'm that burr under the saddle. So my good friends have just stopped even asking me. They call me the know-it-all. But she called me. We were getting ready to drive somewhere, and she said, "Can you pick me up?" She said, "I went out, walked the dog." She said, "I got really dizzy, and I had to sit down." And she said, "I'm afraid I can't drive." I said, "Have you had anything to drink today? Have you had any water?" It was hot. It was that heat wave that we had here. And she took her dog across the street to the park, walked, the dog around for 20 minutes or so. I'm like, now, I also said, if this continues, go be checked out by your healthcare provider. But if you're not drinking enough water, one of the things that happens is you get dehydrated. And if you're really dehydrated, it shuts your brain down and you can die. I was just reading an article, the Sun paper, about, it happened, a heat stroke. And we're talking about the excessive exposure to heat. And this young
Mhm.
guy, it was a football practice, and this young gentleman died. And this was a couple years ago in Baltimore, or at University of Maryland. So, I mean, there's real effects to not staying hydrated. A little too much alcohol or caffeine, if you haven't experienced that, um, again, I'm thinking most people have, you over imbibe, and then the next day you feel like somebody has stuffed your head and mouth with cotton balls. There's not a lick of any moisture there. And usually that's where the headache, or I would say that is where the headache comes from. The brain gets inflamed and you get a headache and you feel like crap. And it's because, first thing, you got to drink water. And coffee, unfortunately, or tea don't count. There are people that will say yes, but I say no. Not eating enough hydrating vegetables and fruits. So, especially like this time of year, and this is what I love about Mother Nature, she provides. So, it's hot. What's available? Juicy fruits and watery vegetables. Zucchini, cucumbers, melons, all those things, very hydrating. Put those in your diet, make sure you're getting enough of those. It's just going to help you feel better and really help to hydrate the body and the brain. Over exercising. Now, that's never happened to me, but if you're doing too much exercise, and again, not staying hydrated, not drinking enough, you're going to get dehydrated. And then, as we said before, that excessive exposure to heat. And I try to get a little bit of sunlight first thing in the morning. And then I like to stay out of the that hot afternoon sun this time of year between like 10 and 2. Come inside, do whatever I need to do inside, and then maybe get outside again later in the afternoon. My body can't handle it. I was born in the 50s, grew up in the 60s and 70s, and we would bake all day in the sun. Didn't
Mhm.
care. And I was outside this morning, and I was thinking about this, looking at the plants, and I like, oh, you're dehydrated. You need water. Their leaves start to do this, and that too much sun exposure just dries you out from the outside in. And then by not replenishing that, we dry out from the inside out. So, what can you do about it? Well, of course, drink more water. And this is water. I put some stuff in my, like mint and ginger has been my summer drink, but not fizzy water and not those chemically sweetened, what do they call them? Whatever special waters, but just plain water. Try to get half your ideal body weight in ounces. Oh, I forgot to put that in here, there too, but it's in ounces daily. And again, eat the foods that are in season. Nature designed that to help you stay healthy and pretty much fuel for whatever the season is. Limit alcohol and caffeinated beverages, and then avoid that midday sun. And I love this statistic. It's drinking water can improve your brain health by simply improving the blood flow and oxygen to the brain. So when you're dehydrated, your blood gets thicker and stickier. So it's not going to run through your system. And you only need to be 1% dehydrated to experience a 5% decrease in cognitive function. I'm going to say that again. You only need to be 1% dehydrated to experience a 5% decrease in cognitive function. So that's how essential this is. And a 2% decrease in brain hydration can result in short term memory loss. And it's been shown that people will have trouble with things like math computations. So, again, you want to stay hydrated. Our brain is up to, I think the statistic is 85%.
75.
Well, I've read, anywhere between 75 and 80% water. It depends on who who you're researching. But anyway, is it's a big um it's a big proportion. And prolonged um dehydration actually causes brain cells to shrink in size and mass. And this is a condition that is common in many elderly people because they forget to drink their water. And that maybe they've been dehydrated for years. So definitely a contributing factor to brain function. And then the mental symptoms of dehydration can include depression, afternoon fatigue, sleep issues, inability to focus, and lack of mental clarity, which we would call brain fog. So, again, it has a big effect. And our brains need uh, water, need to be hydrated in order to work efficiently.
So I wanted to share what Terry was in the chat talking about how important it is to drink before you're thirsty. She shared that when she's sailing, she must drink or she does lose cognitive function. It's easy to forget. I have a marked water bottle with times on it. That's a great idea.
That's a
So
good
we
hack.
share a lot of tips like that in our cleanse too. But any way you can figure out how to make that happen. Um, as an example, for me, I have this big monster thing that I usually fill twice. Last night, I fill it in the morning and then I fill it later in the afternoon as I empty it. And last night I was filling it and John goes, "Isn't that your morning thing you do?" And I'm like, "Yeah, but I ran out and then I ran out. And then I wanted to make sure it was full because I had an early morning this morning. I didn't want to like forget. And then I don't get water in me until 10 o'clock. So it's just a matter of being conscious around what you're doing and why.
And things like Sue with her allergies, a lot of runny nose, a lot of blowing. When we were out of town last week, I got a cold, a lot of blowing my nose. So I am getting rid of all of this fluid, and I had to keep drinking and drinking and drinking. And my head really hurt because of all the blowing. And I think there was probably a link to dehydration.
Sure.
All
Sure.
right, what's the number one risk?
Lack of oxygen. That sounded pretty. I should go lack of oxygen, because we don't realize the importance of how much oxygen the brain needs. It's a really, really huge piece to the health of our brain. So, um, sedentary lifestyle, obviously, that's the first one. Smoking, improper breathing patterns. Chris is going to talk about that in a minute. And high blood pressure. These are causes or possible reasons why you have lack of blood flow to your brain. Obvious solutions are the opposite. Exercise every day, quit smoking, stay hydrated, practice breathing, and learn how to manage your stress response. All of these things contribute to whether the blood is flowing to the brain properly and whether you have enough oxygen in your cells to give the brain what it needs. And if the brain will take what it needs, I mean, that's the thing about the brain is it's like it's a vital organ. So our bodies are like, yeah, the heart's not going to get it or the gut's not going to get it because the brain needs to get it. But if we are deficient enough, we're going to end up having a real issue overall. So oxygen to the brain, blood flow to the brain. We all have heard about people that have had strokes because their carotid arteries are clogged up. These are huge things to think about. And as Chris and I talk a lot about our work, there are so many things that we can do from today moving forward that can really impact the quality and the health of our body and our mind. It's not over. It's a huge thing that we need to understand. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, what you're dealing with. There's a step that you can take towards a better health and well-being just in general. So number one risk factor is oxygen or lack of oxygen to the brain. And there are many things you can do to help yourself with that. Chris, do you have anything else you want to add about that?
Just, that whole idea of maybe the exercise piece is what comes up for me as far as stimulating the oxygen through the body, especially something that's a little more vigorous. Um, like I hop on my bike, I try to do that at least a couple times a week. And when I'm out there, I'm really, my mind gets to wander a bit, but I do think about how oxygen and blood are flowing through the body. I start to feel it in my legs, and then I will start to, if I'm conscious of how I'm breathing, I start to kind of direct it to different parts of the body. And I'm also a lot of encouragement for those legs to keep moving so I can make it up those hills. But, that little bit of what Sue, what we would classify as good stress to the body really helps things keep flowing. And a lot of what we are talking about here is keeping things moving and flowing, because once they stop, you're in big trouble. And,
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
Ayurveda,
Like in Ayurveda, what did we say, Chris? That clogs the channels.
yeah,
So
we
whether
talk,
you're talking about a blood flow channel or an energetic channel or any other kind of nerve channel, they get plugged, clogged, and then we end up with all kinds of dis-ease. And just to remind you of that statistic that Chris said earlier, it's a metabolically active organ. The brain is, it's only 2% of our total body weight, and it takes 20% of our oxygen and blood flow. So just as a reminder how important that is.
all right. So we put in here two simple solutions because they're very doable for everyone. The first is breathing well. So in yoga, of course, we have our pranayama practices, but a little more than that is just the day to day. How well do you breathe? And my first um, recommendation would be pay attention and make sure that you're breathing in and out through your nose, unless, of course, your nose is clogged up and you have to breathe through your mouth. But, that makes a huge difference. And why? Because when you're breathing well, it enhances your blood flow to the brain, it calms the nervous system, and it's a really great way to manage our stress response. The thing about like a formal breathing practice is it has a short shelf life. So if you start to say, you know what, I'm going to sit for 20 minutes every day or 10 minutes or whatever it is, and just calm down and breathe well and really just, make it your little breathing meditation, um, it's great and it has an immediate effect. The only thing is, it's has no shelf life. So it's short lived. It's a wonderful thing to do, but that's part of the reason why I like bringing this breathing awareness into your day to day. Think of the pause. Something happens, you stand back, you pause. And we've all used this, take a deep breath. So instead of just taking a deep breath, why don't you take 10? And again, paying attention. Are you breathing deeply? Get the breath out of the chest and into the rest of the body. Um,
So I
and then,
just want to, oh, sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to share a little aside about this. I went to my body worker not too long ago. It was actually after my trip to Florida with my sister. And I thought I had handled it pretty well. I thought my stress response was really good. But you're flying back and forth, and there was some medical things that went on. And I got on the table and she started doing this weird like massage thing. So if anybody of you are, massage therapist oriented, you'll understand. And I didn't understand. She was like rubbing my belly and she took her fingers up by my rib cage. And every time I inhaled, she would pull down to my navel. And I'm like, what are you doing? And she's like, well, your diaphragm is up in your esophagus. You are not breathing well, and your diaphragm is completely constricted. I had no clue. No clue. I thought I was handling it well, but she could see it in my body the minute I laid down. So if your diaphragm is constricted from a stress that you're not dealing with, it's going to live up in your esophagus. And, the secondary issue to that is, okay, you're not breathing well, and you still have this fight or flight stress response going on. Your muscles are constricted. And oh, by the way, what happens when you push that up into your esophagus? How many people have reflux?
Mhm.
It's going up instead of going down. Right. So it was really a good learning experience for me because I actually thought I was managing it. Had I done meditation the whole time I was gone? No. Had I done breathing practice the whole time I was gone? No. So, you live and you learn.
Mhm. Well, and the other thing that the um, breathing well will help you uh, ignite the vagus nerve. Is that the right way to say it? Get you in, stimulate
Stimulate the vagus nerve.
the vagus
Mm-hmm.
nerve and get you into the parasympathetic, which is that
Right.
rest and digest
Right.
part of our
Yeah.
physiology where we want to live most of the time.
And just because Chris mentioned the vagus nerve is the complex that goes from the brainstem down to the gut, and then innervates everywhere. So it's called the wandering nerve. Um, and we heard this story from a friend of ours when I was visiting. She used to work in the OR, and she was saying that the doctor was accidentally they had the body open. I don't remember what surgery they were doing, but they had the body open and he was doing something, and the anesthesiologist was watching the blood pressure crash. And it was because he didn't realize he was bothering, he was touching, he was stimulating or irritating the vagus nerve complex. And the anesthesiologist is going, stop, 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 because the blood pressure was crashing. So think about that. Like, oh my God. So gut issues, stress response, huge. Oh, Kimberly's asking, are there ways for us to bring our own diaphragm down without a therapist? Deep belly breathing is the best way. And if you're having trouble, I would say lay down, maybe put a sandbag on your belly to help stimulate that diaphragm to start to activate. We do that in yoga a lot, where you put a weight, usually a 10-pound or 8-pound sandbag, across your diaphragm, and you try to breathe into the diaphragm. And because you're pushing against something, the diaphragm has to work a little harder. It kind of wakes up, and then you take it off and you can get that deep breath. Once you get that deep breath, the vagus nerve will get stimulated and will calm you down.
Dr. Douillard has a practice specifically for that. I remember it. I can't remember exactly where it is, but I'll search for it for you, Kimberly. And it's probably very similar to what Sue just said, but it was
Mhm.
specifically when your diaphragm gets bound up too high. And so it's fairly common. And
Yeah.
it is definitely part of the stress response.
Mhm.
And then our other ally in all of this is meditation. So, a great antidote to stress. It actually makes your gray matter grow. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And promotes healthy, sustained focus. So, and I'm going to, this is from a neurologist or neuroscience. And this is the analogy that he uses to describe the way the brain changes under meditation. When we exercise a muscle, it becomes larger and denser with muscle mass. In a similar way, when we exercise any part of the brain, which we do when we meditate, it becomes larger and denser with neural mass and gray matter. The phenomenon is known as neuroplasticity and describes how the brain actually changes throughout life. So, one of the things that meditation has been known for is this whole idea of really, it's brain training. So, its ability to actually make you smarter as you age. So, research has also found that just 25 minutes of hatha yoga or mindful meditation per day can boost the brain's executive functions, cognitive abilities linked to goal directed behavior, and the ability to control knee jerk emotional responses. And that's that react versus respond,
Mhm.
habitual thinking patterns and actions. And we're going to go deep into this in our next course because really letting you know that there are definite ways that you can control the way that you respond to what goes on in your world. And who doesn't need a little help with life as we age? It just gets, it's, I don't know whether it's harder or, I wouldn't say harder, but it's just a little more challenging in many ways, or a lot more challenging. And I thought this was super interesting. So, in one area of the gray matter, the thickening, which the brain actually starts to thicken with meditation, turns out to be more pronounced in older people than in younger people. Woohoo! Yay! And that's really intriguing because sections of the human cortex or thinking cap normally get thinner as we age. So I thought that was um, very hopeful, number one, and just super interesting. Okie dokie.
So you're not stuck with the brain you have. There are things you can do no matter what your age. And that is the big message of today, that no matter where you are and what your process is, you have choices. And we gave you some solutions today, some simple solutions. Chris is going to lead us through a very simple breathing practice in a second. And I think it's really empowering. That's part of why we call our work empowered living, is we want to be able to feel empowered and have choices to enhance our well-being. And we aren't destined. And neuroscience and epigenetics is proving this. There's so much out there now that, and it's a budding field. Almost every single day, you see a new research, a new something or another about epigenetics and how our genes can change and how our brain can change and all those things. And everything that Chris and I research keeps coming back to what we teach in Ayurveda. Your daily habits and your lifestyle choices do make a big difference in the outcome of your health and well-being as you age. That's just fundamental. So,
I like to think that it really creates the opportunity for us to take control.
yeah, we
I mean,
have the power. Yeah.
right? We can beat ourselves up for all our past bad choices and maybe future too, but we do have control over um, our future, which I think is super hopeful.
hmm Do you want to lead your breathing
Yeah, we're
practice
just gonna
now?
do, it's not gonna be more than a minute or two, just to give you a little bit of awareness. So if you're sitting in a chair, I would recommend you get in a position where you can plant your feet on the floor and sit tall. And then take your uh, uh, right hand on your belly left hand on your chest. And we're just going to do some deep belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, just something to help maybe loosen or exercise the diaphragm. You can keep your eyes open, you can keep them closed. If they're open, it's always a good idea to kind of take the gaze down away from the screen so that you can be where you are. So just get a sense of how are you breathing now? Where's the breath moving? Is it up in the top of the chest or are you a deep breather? Now, on your next inhale through both nostrils, you're going to breathe into the hand resting on the belly. Let it expand. And then when you're ready on an exhale, just let the hand move in as the breath moves out. And then maybe even a little belly squeeze here. So taking the navel towards the spine and then also up towards the heart. Hold the breath out for a beat or two. And then when you're ready, let go. Let the breath fill you. If it needs a little help, go ahead. Find it deep in the belly. Nice, soft, expanded belly. Keeping the chest still. Exhaling. Little belly squeeze, navel to spine, up to heart. And then letting go. Let the breath fill you. Stay present with the breath. And 2 more full deep inhales and exhales. And then go ahead, just rest your hands in your lap. Find the pause. And if you had your eyes closed, you can open them now. Let the breath return to normal. So sometimes just that simple, just finding a minute or two to breathe fully and start to train yourself to be a better breather. The more that you become aware of how you're breathing, the the better you're going to get. It's just like anything else that you practice.
All right.
So,
So we're sort of done with that presentation. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to share?
I have a question.
Yes, Kimberly.
Difference between breathing through the nose and breathing through the mouth, because you've suggested to, as much as possible, breathe through the nose in and out.
yes. So when I'm vigorously exercising, I will breathe in through the nose and then I push the breath out through my mouth. But other than that, it's in and out through the nose, unless, of course, your nose is blocked up. It's because when you breathe in and out through the nose, the nose was designed, first of all, to breathe. It's got the cilia that filters the pollutants, it warms the air, and it has a direct line to deep into the lungs. And what we want to do, and why diaphragmatic breathing is so important, is if we're not good breathers, the alveoli get a little sluggish. And that's where there's that oxygen blood exchange. So you want to breathe fully and all the way down there. If you're breathing in and out through your mouth, you stay really shallow up in your chest, and it also triggers the fight or flight response. So if you're a constant mouth breather, pretty much can guarantee that you're kind of in chronic low stress mode most of the time, because it's like and you're just, the breath stays here. And I remember hearing this years ago, and it was one of the first guys from India who came over to this country to introduce yoga. And his comment was, oh my God, the Americans are just all chest breathers. Now, this was the turn of the 19th century. Women were wearing corsets and all that stuff, but so bound up. Think about Victorian era, everybody's a little stiff, and that you can't really relax. So breathing through the nose helps you to move the diaphragm, helps to really get in touch with the vagus nerve, turn on the parasympathetic, and keep you much more in that rest and digest zone. Anything to add to that, Sue?
No, I think that's pretty clear. The research shows that when you breathe in through your nose, it has one response, and when you breathe in through your mouth, it has another. And there are lots of different practitioners and styles of breath that will say breathe in through your nose and breathe out through your mouth for different reasons. There's always a reason of why they're asking you to do that. And if they don't know the reason, they shouldn't be doing it. Terry's asking, she's asking about pre-sleeping breathing, where we do a 4-2-7 or other ratio breath in from the nose and out through the mouth forcefully. I don't know of that being a specific pre-sleeping breathing pattern. I've not heard of that. If that's something you want to share with us, feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, it really helps you fall asleep. There's a couple of different ones. You can do a 7-8. You can do, but I think the 7-4 with the pause on the 2, and then but you blow it out. You go like that. You actually make your lips.
They call that straw breathing.
Straw breathing.
What's
And
wrong?
my guess is because it's a more concentrated exhale, that's what contracts the diaphragm, and then you'll be able to relax the diaphragm on your next inhale. So there might be that if you have that tendency to be a little bit tense when you go to bed, there might be some support to that.
I know some people who never make it through 2 or 3. I make it to about 5 usually, but most people that I've spoken to who've tried it with the 7-4, I mean the 4-2-7, they conk out before they finish their last breath.
Whatever works. And extending the exhale is
Always.
really helps you relax, really helps you turn on parasympathetic response.
That's
Have
what we
you
do in
ever-
scuba diving?
Have you ever, has anybody ever woken up in the middle of the night? This has happened to me. And I'm trying to go back to sleep, and I'm trying to extend my exhale. And what I'm really doing, and I have seen people do this in their sleep, they're inhaling and then inhaling and so the exhale is real short and almost staccato like, which will wake you up because it's going to stimulate your system. And then to try to reverse that when you're awake, I'm like, oh my God, I can't quite do it. It was like my body was in this weird, maybe I was dreaming or something. Has anybody ever had that experience? No, I'm the only one.
Yes.
Kimberly's yes.
Now that
Okay.
you mention it, I never thought about it.
Yeah.
There's another cool thing that I've tried. I read about it on, I don't know, on one of the medical pages somewhere, that if you do 2 short inhales and then 1 long exhale, if you feel particularly stressed, it relaxes you. It's probably the same thing with the diaphragm you're talking about. But if I'm just sitting somewhere and I feel like I'm stressed and I go, it really, really helps.
Yeah. Well, you've trained your body to do that, and that's really good. You've trained your body to be in that, to get a response when you do that certain kind of breath. And that's really the the reason we practice breath work and the reason we practice meditation is we set up our system. So as soon as we get into that whatever practice, or you sit down on your mat with your meditation cushion, like your body goes, oh yeah, now I know what we're doing. And it's a really, it's practice, and then it starts to integrate into the system. It's powerful stuff, simple and powerful. I stopped sharing because I wanted to see all your beautiful faces.
Going back to sharing though, because we weren't done, right?
Yeah, we are. I know what I'm doing next.
Go ahead.
Anybody else have questions?
Yeah. I just have an observation that they say that women tend to be more compliant with dietary guidelines, which is why women of our generation who ate no fat and lots of carbs and bread don't have such a weight problem now, because whereas men tend to ignore the guidelines, so they're not as overweight as we
That's
are.
right. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. What do we have to learn about that?
I've got a
Yeah.
really silly question. In your diagrams, I'm assuming the brain cell is in the back and the cerebellum is like, must be near the pituitary, like above your roof of your mouth or something.
The cerebrum is the biggest part of the brain. It's
I mean, the
part that-
cerebellum, I mean.
the
cerebellum.
cerebellum is back and behind.
So it's behind the brain stem or what?
No, the brain stem is sort of underneath, but it connects the cerebrum and the cerebellum together. So if you think about one being up
nervous
here and
system.
one being down here, and the brain stem is sort of in the middle.
Hmm.
They call the cerebellum the little one.
Yes.
Yeah, they call it the tiny brain.
Mhm.
So if people
Mhm.
get concussions, where do they get them?
Usually in the cerebrum, but the cerebrum has 4 lobes, and they do different parts, which is why when people get dementia or Alzheimer's, it looks different, because it depends on where the disintegration of the brain is happening. And it's very, very different for everybody. So that's why some people can, remember numbers, but they can't remember names, or some people can do times of day, but they can't figure out when to eat. It's really different. And we watched a podcast all about brain scans, and it was fascinating to see the different variations in the brain scans. Didn't really have anything to do with like the person's diet or whatever. It was just
Okay.
as this dementia or as this Alzheimer's process started to happen, it actually address different parts of the brain. We're going to go more into that in empowered living, but it's, again, if you think about the organ of the brain being healthy, the mind and the thoughts can move through really easily. But if there's a part of the brain that's starting to shrink, the gray matter is actually starting to shrink, then those parts that lobe takes care of is going to start to diminish. And once that starts to happen, meditation, breath work, all the healthy foods, all the things can help you actually change the brain. They never said this before, but this is new information. The new science and the epigenetics can show that with changes, serious changes, not just, oh, I think I'll do it for today, but really mindful, quantitative, everyday changes, your brain will change, which I think is fascinating. And a lot of people, the Alzheimer's Association, this isn't really commonly known because it just recently happened, but the Alzheimer's Association, they just had a big conference recently. I want to say it was back in the spring. And the research papers are showing, the studies they're doing shows now that what they thought was contributing to the plaque buildup and all that stuff isn't actually what's happening. And therefore the medications, they can help a little bit, but they're missing the mark. They're missing the mark. And the information that I heard was saying everybody's going back to lifestyle. Everybody's going back to, if you're and I'll share this with you openly, I drink my wine at night. It's a toxin to the brain, period. There's no, red wine or white wine, or no, it's all inflammatory in nature. So if I care I shouldn't be having any alcohol, period. And that's the kind of stuff they're talking about. Like, you can't just goof around. This is really serious stuff. But anyway, not to be a Debbie Downer about drinking wine, but it's the reality, and we can find studies to enhance anything we want. Like, oh, I'm drinking my coffee and it's good. Or, oh, I'm eat my chocolate and it's good. And there's another part to that. So anybody else, questions, comments?
From what you just said, Sue, and I really respect the way you guys, research in current ways. So my understanding is that good, organic, mold-free coffee without, a bunch of weird additives is good for you.
It can be, yes, it can be. But depending, go back to Ayurveda, depending on whether it's something that's a trigger for you. I can't do coffee at all. I don't care how good it is. My body doesn't like it, and I get really reactive to it. So there's just that for me. You might really be doing well on it. And there's a lot of good studies that say that, that kind of coffee is really, really good. And then how much is the other question? There's that.
I drink coffee every morning. I have a cup of coffee pretty much every morning. Now, Ayurvedically speaking, I'm more Vata constitution, and they would say, not so great for you, because it tends to, caffeine kind of revs you up. And if we are already in that, it's just going to increases. But it is good for focus for some people. Kapha individuals, that sturdier, more durable person can really handle coffee, and it's good for them. Am I going to stop drinking coffee? Probably not. And I do buffer it with organic half and half, because the bitterness of the straight coffee is just, it's too astringent for me. So I want something to kind of smooth it out. And again, we all make our choices. One of the things that I love is, if you're going to make a choice that is maybe not optimal, especially talking about like food and drink and that kind of thing, enjoy it. Because if you go into it with overburdened with guilt, then it's really going to be not good for you. So, and from a digestive point of view, you're going to digest it better if you're enjoying it and, kind of savoring what's going on. We are not 100% always on the straight and narrow. We're householders. Sue and I always go back to the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time you do the best you can. And then 20%, you might, you got to leave room for celebration and other things, because that's life. We don't want to live in this little vacuum of, gee, we're sitting outside the cave at the top of the Himalayas and people are coming to feed us. That's not our lives. We want to interact with people and enjoy things, which are also very health giving.
Yeah. And just remember, we're going to go into this more in our next program, but that saying, you've heard that saying, we are our thoughts, right? There's a huge connection to what we're thinking and what we believe and how our body responds. So Kimberly, to your coffee question, I know you've researched this a lot for yourself and you feel really good about doing it. So there you go. Do that. If you start to notice that you're taking 4 cups of coffee during the day and your stomach's starting to bother you, well, then it's like maybe not too much, because Americans are great at too much. We do everything too big, too much all the time. If 1 glass of wine at dinner is great, we're going to have 3 more after dinner, right? If 1 little piece of chocolate cake is good, then we're going to eat the whole cake. Like, it's just what we do. We're just crazy that way. And just as we have been sort of teasing you along, the next module for our Empowered Living course is Monday. We start Monday. It's 4 weeks. And we go into the brain, the mind, and our emotions. And they all play together, and they're all linked, and they're not separate, and yet they are. So it's a very, very, very powerful program. And Ayurveda says all disease starts in the mind. A lot of people don't like to hear that, but that's actually where we're going. And in the module, if you're at least, I mean, in your, if you're interested at all, we've got 4 weeks. And what it looks like is Monday night, we have 5:30 Mountain Time. We have our coaching session for the week. It's where we give all the juicy information. And then on Wednesday or Thursday, depending on our group, we do a follow-up practice and Q&A session where we share a separate practice, and we also do any questions and answers. We have a free bonus. Chris is creating a pranayama for the brain, which is yours to keep. We have a special guest speaker. Our friend and colleague Amanda is going to share us with all the things on the Enneagram. So if you guys don't know what the Enneagram, it's what they lightly call the personality quiz, but that's so not accurate. It's so much more, got so much more depth than that. And it goes really nicely with this whole brain and mind thing. We give you a weekly workbook. We've got weekly emails. So we stay in touch with you through the 4 weeks. And thanks for a great class. It's Terry.
Thanks, Terry.
Oh, especially essential oils. Yeah, we're talking about that more. What was I going to say about that? Now I lost my train of thought. Oh, well. Oh, we have all of our empowered living courses. At the end of the 4 weeks, we do what's called a roadmap, your own personal roadmap for the topic. So what kind of choices are you making? What's in your way? What kind of lifestyle habits can you start to incorporate to create a map for yourself to move forward after we're done with the 4 weeks, so that you don't end up going back to your own crazy, because that's what we all do. We go back to our own crazy. We forget. Right? Oh, I felt really good when I was doing that meditation. And then life gets in the way and you forget. And then you don't feel so great. I mean, I found that to be true when I was traveling. So now you got to get back on track. Anyway, I wanted to give that little spiel about the program. And if you've taken our other programs before, our other empowered living programs, you get a $50 discount. And we'll put the link in an email. You'll probably get something tomorrow about that. Okay. Anybody have any questions? Thanks, Sue and Chris. Thanks, Kimberly. Thank you all for being here.
And thank you guys. It's
Thank
great.
you. Great questions, great feedback. And we hope you guys will join us for our next module, Power of the Mind and Emotions.
That's right.
Big one.
Take care, everybody.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye. Thank
Great
you.
day. Recording has
Yes,
stopped.
it hasn't.
I know. I just was reminding you.
No, I'm looking for it. It's very strange. I can't find it. So I'm going to end the whole thing and then we can talk about it later, but I'll call you in a minute.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.